Did we experience that with the Celtics? Was that part capitalism?
Wait, are you?
Because
yes.
I don't think the.
Are you in for the fix?
Well, it's not the 617 stuff, but if I'm the NBA and I am a business, I recognize that I have one of my international superstars, Luka Doncic, getting embarrassed. I need to ride him for the next 10, 15 years to grow my brand. And so I need to give him a gentleman's sweep and make sure that he still has the reach that he does. Also, by keeping him on for one more game, again, I get to watch people in Europe. They're watching those numbers.
That's true.
Okay? And so they really don't care about the Celtics winning. The NBA is looking to grow globally. And so they're looking at all their stars and saying, how do we grow our business? That's what I think.
But do you think there's any element? I mean, the Celtics on Friday played so terribly.
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't played that bad even in a quarter all year round. Maybe 1 or 2 quarters this year they've played that badly.
Right.
There's no way they didn't throw that game. And then did what they did last night.
Yeah, I mean, so you're saying you think Boston did it just to win here?
I think Boston threw it for sure, just to win in Boston, coming back in Boston.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. And I don't know if maybe they tied together 617, but it was also exactly 16 years ago, blah, 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 blah. I mean, my grandfather, my papa, God rest his soul, Papa, he always said the NBA was fixed. Always.
Although, I don't know if it's, I never say it's fixed. I don't say any of it's fixed.
Adjusted.
I don't even say adjusted. I say it's orchestrated.
Fine.
Because you can't, at the end of the day, people are still going to put the ball in the hoop. And so you can't control it to that degree, but you can orchestrate.
They did Friday night. Ugh, it was bad.
But the reason why they didn't put the ball in the hoop, though, is because they changed their strategy, to which my point would say that maybe they did.
Fair.
In the first 3 games, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum were driving to the basket. In that game, all they did was shoot step back.
Yes.
We have a highlight video of people blowing by Luka Doncic's defense, and they did not try to go by him.
Yeah, you're right. That's fair. I think that's fair. It's still fixed, but their spacing was off on Friday. They didn't last night. Holiday got the first 6 points because he drove to the basket. And
my point.
Yeah. So
my point.
He was in the
we
paint.
knew they had a soft middle, and then game 4 they didn't do it at all.
Sports.
Yeah.
I was going to say, how many innings did this go? Because that's where I am. So,
baseball fan?
I mean, I will go to the Woo Sox, which I love.
Yes.
The stadium and the whole vibe over there. But I'm a.
Do you get a Coney Island hot dog when you're in there?
No.
The Sundae in the helmet.
On the helmet, right?
That's yours. That's your ballpark.
Nostalgia.
That's your ballpark.
I get it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
I will say, and I've already shared this with Michael, but I don't know if you notice up on my shelf there, and Marrio, maybe you'll have to take a picture later, but there are 2 trophies up there. You see those 2 trophies? Yeah. Well, you see to the right, there's a little bit of blank space to the right of the peacock.
The other picture? Yeah.
Yeah. There's like a little space up there.
For
the 3rd trophy.
Which will be?
That my team won on Sunday.
What, kickball?
Kickball,
Yeah.
Woo Pride Kickball. Outlawed Sports, Woo Pride Kickball. And you are co-host and guesting with and producing
MVP?
the league's only 3-time three-peat champion.
Let's go.
Okay.
Let's go.
Okay.
Let's go.
I mean, there was high amount of pressure.
Let's go.
Bottom of the 7th, home team up at the plate. Score is real close. I'm pitching. I'm getting a lot of trash talk. I just stayed focused through my strikes.
Locked in.
Locked in.
Game Took it
over.
home. 3 in a row.
Game over.
3-peat?
Stingers 2.0 won it.
Nice.
I won't say on air what the name of the team that we beat, which was my team last year.
You left that team and went, what are you, Kevin Durant? What?
No, okay, I'm going to tell you a quick story. So I started the first season I played, which was spring of 23. I started with the Stingers.
Yeah.
We won.
Okay.
That team was organized randomly. There was you didn't pick your teams. The second season, which was fall of this year, fall of 23, the teams were also organized randomly, and I got assigned to what was then the teal team, and we won that championship.
Gotcha.
This season, spring 24, we were able to select our own teams.
Got
so
it.
I went back to my OG team.
I see.
Stingers 2.0.
Got it.
And we won. So secret sauce right there.
What's in it?
It's spaghetti sauce.
Oh,
but I'm the secret sauce.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's why it's here.
I got it.
It's not here for that reason specifically, but it fit this particular narrative today. That came from when we expanded our Head Start centers into Leicester.
What's a prop for
and
motivation?
I found this old canned food.
Yeah, that's a what 10
middle
pound?
school that we're
what is
now.
that?
It's like
of tomato sauce.
It's 106 ounces.
Yeah.
So it's 6 pounds. Yeah, 6 pounds. Yeah. That's a lot of old spaghetti sauce. And there was green beans and all kinds of things. So I went with the secret sauce.
Nice.
But we're in that building now and almost fully enrolled, working Leicester, Build Becker campus near there. So.
You know, I was complete non sequitur, but you should know this. I had to even talk to my board because I told them that there were literally right now 3 companies after me. Talk about secret sauce. There are 3 companies after me, and I needed a raise if they wanted to keep me. So who's after you? I said the electric company, the gas company,
and the phone feeling company. It was going in this direction.
Is after me, and I need a raise.
We're a big fan of dad jokes.
Yeah,
I don't know if you caught any of the or bad jokes, as we might go. So, all right, let's get us started and
lock us in.
Welcome episode number 17.
On 6/17, after the Celtics won on 6/17.
That's right.
It's the fix is in.
Yeah, there is a
fix.
Is in.
Yes.
Nice. Well, I am co-host Marybeth Campbell, CEO of Worcester Community Action Council, joined by
Ron Waddell, the co-founder, and executive director of Legendary Legacies.
Yes, and we're so psyched to have our next guest here with us, Michael Ibrahim from
Third Sector New England, TSNE.
Yes, so excited. TSNE, we're very familiar with Third Sector.
Yes.
And I was sharing a little bit with Michael that this building has objectives towards being a sort of nonprofit center of excellence. And my predecessor, I don't think I mentioned this part, but my predecessor, it was her big vision to have this kind of building and had spent a lot of time with Third Sector talking about how to do that. So her dream is sort of making progress to fruition in this
And we
building.
need more people doing it. So
Yes, yeah. And that's kind of what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Sector infrastructure and sector investment and kind of talking about what that is and what that means in the nonprofit world. And, we came across some work that you were doing in your new role as Chief Program Officer at TSNE. But what we normally do in our introductions is we just ask our guests to just kind of share a little bit about your origin story, of which you can share anything you like from a professional or personal background. Like, how did you get here?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. My story actually is a little complicated in the fact that I was a gay kid who grew up in Kentucky in the South, trying to figure out what my life would be. And I found music in that process. So I came up, I play the clarinet, I compose, I play the piano, and really was an outlet for me for so many reasons. And so through high school and then into college, I actually got a clarinet scholarship to the University of Kentucky, where I was thinking about being a doctor and being pre-med. I don't know where that came from or why that happened. But for the next couple of years, I was going to organic chemistry and
that's a hard one.
biology.
Organic chem.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
tough.
While studying music history and being in the marching band and performing in clarinet studios because I was on the scholarship. And then
Were you in the band?
He was in the stands. He was playing for the Wildcats.
And we were talking about basketball. So we were in the row with the pep band.
Yeah.
And that was the Tubby Smith time.
Right.
And all that kind of stuff.
Blue Bloods.
I mean, it was kind of wild. And then the beginning of my junior year, my advisor said, I've been looking at your grades. Are you sure this pre-med is really something you should be doing? Because it's not adding up over here.
Candor is kindness.
Yeah. And I said, yeah, you're probably right. Thanks for saying it out loud. And so it kind of redirected me over back to music a little bit. And so thinking about what kind of career I would want to be a part of, the program had an arts management, arts administration program as well. So then I started to think about there's an ecosystem here. There's governance, there's marketing, fundraising, advocacy, policy that could be part of this, and the National Endowment for the Arts, the state agency in Kentucky. And this could be something that I might want to get into. And that program actually prepared in an internship and other experiences to understand what it takes to operate a nonprofit organization. And one of those was being an intern at Barrington Stage, which I went to. It's out in the Berkshires. Phenomenal theater company, won tons of awards. And I was the press and marketing intern that summer stock season. And you learn everything that you want to know from a nonprofit organization by doing that work 80 hours a week. It was a lot. But it really solidified that there's a really community and it's actually doing something. And so I decided to stay in Massachusetts at that point. I got a job as a development director at a community music school in Newton. And as many people who are in small and mid-sized organizations know, your title is one thing, but then you do 1,000 other things. So that's finding faculty, negotiating contracts. I learned HTML coding in order to get a website up and running, Adobe Publisher, all the stuff that you learn when you have to do that. And so that really kind of set me up to say, okay, there's a lot more to this than what I thought. And then I came over to the Mass Cultural Council, where I was a program manager for about 7 years in the Cultural Investment Portfolio, which is the unrestricted operating support program over there, which I got to learn a lot about the Boston Foundation, which I know you were
neighbors.
at. We were neighbors down there. We were talking about Davios a little bit.
Yes, little chicken salad action.
And in that program, it was great because we had the ability to provide unrestricted operating support, no strings attached. So if you needed to buy toilet paper, because that's important right now, you buy that toilet paper or pay the utilities or staffing or whatever it might be.
Is that true? Cut the crap. You could cover that.
100%.
She picked that up.
17 episodes plus 7 years adds. So I know when the jokes are bad.
No, but it's spot on. This is that's really good.
No, well, we were just talking about this other issue that you're facing.
We'll talk about it in a bit.
Yeah,
okay.
But that's
Curious your thoughts.
Yeah, and because of that, there was really no report because the minute that you ask a grantee, what'd you spend the money on? Power comes into it. So I've got to come up with something that has impact, and what do we do? When really you paid your insurance bill with this or your electric bill.
Wow.
And so it turned our relationships totally different in the fact that we were no longer evaluative at all. We were partnership. And so when we did a visit, it wasn't let me inspect the facility or talk to the people to evaluate you. It was helping everybody understand what's going on in this part of the community. So it was across the state. And so one of the things that came out of there is we were talking about a podcast to share the stories of what people were figuring out and doing, and to cultivate what we said creative capital that already exists around the state and share that. And so we did that. We did a lot of other kind of network weaving, we would call it, initiatives in order just to bring people together, build community. So that was a great initiative. And then Third Sector New England came along. And it was really exciting, and I can talk a little bit more about it, but TSNE has been around for 65 years. Yeah. It's the country's oldest fiscal sponsor. It started at the Massachusetts Resource Institute.
Yeah.
And also have the Nonprofit Center, which is in Boston, the country's first nonprofit center. And so this organization, who's been around for a long time, but truthfully had some growing pains along the way. And so it was a period of rebirth, reimagining of what a TSNE now could be. New leadership, completely new leadership. During the pandemic, there was a 50% turnover in staff that happened, which a lot of nonprofits also faced at that point. And real questions of what is this role as this intermediary, as this capacity builder? Do we even use that term anymore? And organizations that are facing challenges today, are we set up for that? Are we by design for that? Or do we have a system that actually hurts that process? And so in an organization like many in turnaround, there were staffing changes, there were restructuring. And my position was created as Chief Program Impact Officer to really look across all of our different programs, look at what we were actually having impact for, what we couldn't take credit for in the impact, and be able to bring it all together so it's a one-stop shop. So that's been my kind of journey a little bit. I still play the clarinet. I still compose.
I was going to ask,
we live in Hudson, Massachusetts, my husband and I. And
New City Creamery is out there, right?
I was just going to say, we have to meet at the creamery.
Facts.
The Speakeasy.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about that.
So you know. Speakeasy is fabulous, and also Worcester.
It's right by the creamery. It's in the same little area.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, and Worcester's phenomenal. And that was my first love, actually, to Worcester. Was when I was at the Mass Cultural Council working with the Community Foundation. Jonathan over there is fabulous.
He's a loyal listener. He'll appreciate
Jonathan
that
is.
shout out.
It's been a while. Let's talk.
Yes.
But then the Art Museum and Mechanics Hall and the music school. There's just so many different and varied, from my world, artistic and cultural organizations that really make this city unique and a destination for so many. So.
Cool.
Anytime I can come to Worcester, I'm super
Well,
excited.
we appreciate that and appreciate your familiarity too, and with people too. That's really awesome. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. It's every time we have someone on, there's a thread to so many other guest conversations, and this is no different. You know, Natanya Craig Okendo from the Boston Women's Fund, which just aired this week, so it's live, and I know you were listening to it. You know, she talked a lot about what this sort of innate knowledge and that you just kind of saw, you experienced as somebody working in a nonprofit, you experienced the challenges of, the lack of capacity and all hands on deck and doing 10 jobs to one. And I think Natanya shared that too in her own experience, and that how that evolved into her being a thoughtful funder too. Yeah. And both of us working at TBF in a different type of structure as well, in this sort of respect philanthropy that she, I think I'm going to say she coined it. I'm going to give her credit.
Give her her flowers.
She gave me credit for coining Conference Room D, so I'm definitely giving her credit for that. Yes. But yeah, I think that it's all of our conversations talking about this just necessity of capacity building, and what we're going to talk about today is just in some ways such common sense if you've lived the experience of how difficult it is to run a nonprofit, and how much it hasn't shifted that much in philanthropy too, and that real disconnect that happens.
I totally agree. And part of my other gig is I've been teaching at Boston University for the last 13 years in their arts.
Shout out BU,
program.
got my graduate certificate.
There you go.
Yep.
10 years.
And I went through the program, Master's in Arts Administration. And so preparing the next generation and really being in tune with what their needs are, that's not the same as mine.
Yeah.
And the stuff that I did, they're not hanging for, And so, we talk a lot about pathways into leadership, but the reframing of what does the sector need to do to be ready for that leadership? It's actually some structural changes.
Right.
I don't think 80 hours a week is actually a good thing when it comes to this, and we're seeing that with burnout and health and wellness in the nonprofit sector. Yeah. And so thinking about the two sides of that coin is interesting.
Yeah. So can you share with us a little bit? One of the things that prompted us to reach out was the panel you had done not too long ago with some TBFers also.
Yeah.
On the social sector and investing in the social sector. And I think, at TBF, I ran SkillWorks, which is a workforce intermediary. We got funded to fund other organizations. We did a lot of capacity building, a lot of advocacy, and then we did a lot of grant making for like the actual technical workforce development work. But it's a little bit of an amorphous term. The report that came out in 2023 by the Urban Institute, I think it took like 29 pages to define the social sector. And I was like, that seems problematic that it's taking this much rating to explain what it is. And I think for us of different size nonprofits, grassroots, 65-year-old nonprofit, there's a distinction.
Sure.
So can you help us define that a little bit? What is the social service or the social sector?
I can do a little bit of that. I don't know if I can do justice, but when I think about this, I think about we're all working towards social change. And that could be individuals, that can be nonprofit organizations who are directly doing the work. That could be intermediaries, government has a role, philanthropy has a role. So really thinking about across the sector, because we're usually in this box of first, second, and third sectors based on economics, really. And it doesn't tell us where the mission is actually going. And so in order to achieve a lot of the change that we're looking to do, we do need multiple sectors to come together to help us that. We need government to reduce some of the bureaucracy that's there and to provide leadership in public policy. We need nonprofit intermediaries, which we can talk about, to provide a lot of the back-end supports and get out of the way of organizations, grassroots organizations, community-based organizations who are doing it and not take credit for their work, which happens a lot of times. And then we need for-profit in that as well to be a community partner in a lot of the work that we're doing together. So I really think it's one of those things that spans across the traditional three sectors and has the social justice mission on the back end of it.
Yeah, I shared a little bit that our own relationship with which I won't belabor the details because at this point we've talked about it like umpteen times on the show, so listeners
almost
are like,
17.
we get it now. But we didn't play an intermediary WCAC, but I think that is sort of it's a little bit of a nugget of that concept of the relationship that we were able to form because of the mechanics required to help LL get cash flow, for example, and us also getting out of the way. I try to get out of the way. I don't always get out of the way, but I think that has me thinking about our role as an anti-poverty agency, and we do tons of programs and services. And I'm like, what does anti-poverty really look like? And do we have a stronger role as an intermediary and fiscal agency, and using subcontracting as a vehicle, and what's our role in the ecosystem as a larger nonprofit? So this conversation is interesting to me about even like what are we thinking about and what's worked between us too.
No, it is. What's interesting to me, even as we talk about the social sector and read through that report, Michael, is that there are times for me, like I'll ask you, what the advancement of social justice, of social good, right? But it meets barriers all the time.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes for me, those barriers are in the public sector because I think that I've experienced in my work, and say we have misaligned interests, right? For instance, if someone's interest is to maintain power, stay elected, necessarily the work that is advancing this social justice may not be what I choose to invest in because that's not going to help me achieve this target that I have. Right. In the work of the social sector and in your role, how do you see these things coalescing to actually move something forward, not just incrementally? Because I think that's what we get happy with, right? If we could just, we don't dream big enough to really create the changes we want, right? The fact that I would even say on the podcast that we could have potentially a opioid-free state. We won't even have that conversation. We have a conversation about how can we reduce it to something that we find acceptable. And so I'm wondering, like, how those two things come together and what is needed in the social sector to dream about a future that's not yet here, but we desire. And so how do you fund something like that when there's these conflicting or just diverting interests sometimes and pulling these three sectors together? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and it could be diverting it. It could also just be, where do you even start? Like, where do you go? What's the first step of that project? It's so big. And so I think going back a little bit to what you're talking about, there's we've talked about, we know about the nonprofit starvation cycle and starting from a place of deficit mindset. So when we think about a theory of change, we always like, what's the problem? Like, we're already starting at that space, and we're not dreaming to where you want to go or what that place looks like. We tend to say, well, what kind of resources do we have? How much time do we have? What's the capacity? And then we'll build a program on that. Instead of really having the spaciousness to be visionary, to really think about what that long-term longitudinal work looks like. And there's a lot of the scarcity mindset. There are financial resources that don't even allow you to dream because you need to solve a problem today.
Right.
And so it's a lot of Band-Aid. It's a lot of hair on fire. It's a lot of, I got to do this, and then I can't even think about that thing over there. And so in my role as Chief Program and Impact Officer, I get to think about that longer term a little bit to say, how does this lead to this, to this, to this? And this program intersects with this program to generate that. And can we track that over the long term? Can we track that over 5 to 10 years to be able to say, that actually achieved those larger outcomes that we want to get to? But beyond what our sphere of influence and the organizations that we work with, it needs a much larger movement. And so working across organizations like Mass Nonprofit Network and your organization, a lot of other organizations that are advancing that, we need to be able to come together and advocate for that. And a lot of work at TSNE is helping organizations understand where that line is. You can do advocacy, absolutely, as a nonprofit. A lot of people think that you can't. And so what we do is, where is that line? And how do you push right up against in 501c3 stat? How can you push right up against that to really make sure that you are creating the change of the sector that you're within?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a generational element to that too. Maybe you see that hopefully shifting as you're teaching our next generation of leaders, but especially in community action, there's it's always been this way. Right. And of course we hate this role, or we hate that we're monitored this way, or, and I have to say that my peers in the network that we're in there, we have some fierce people. We're not quiet.
That's a good thing.
We're good, supportive peers, and we've made some good changes, but that's kind of there is some complacency of like, I'm too busy worrying about these items over here, even though I have this big vision. Right. I don't have time to advocate. Let's just suck it up and do it. And then nothing ever changes, from a policy point of view or regulatory point of view. And that's the stuff that puts a ton of pressure on, like, cost reimbursement, for example.
Oh, yeah.
And not to, you don't have to, if you don't want to share it, but that is a huge issue of lack of freedom in that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, we're not going to put any names out, but it is fascinating as I work in the sector. We are just over $1 million organization now, which I'm proud to say. We started in 2018, and this is where we are. And so at this point, we're at a serious pain point of maintaining where we were. And we lost significant dollars that aren't coming, the unrestricted dollars that came from the social justice movement of 2020. If you look at our budget, if you look at our audit, it'll look like we lost $120,000 over the last year. What we lost was the unrestricted dollars that people were throwing at us because they wanted to support this. Right. Those aren't coming anymore, right? And so as we face that, we continue to look for other funding. We want to grow our individual donor base, corporate donors, but from the public sector, we applied for this grant. I won't say who it's from, but it's a capacity building grant.
Okay.
We put a LOI in, well received. I jump on the call as I always do, just to kind of find out before the RFP comes out, which, get to know me a little bit. And on the call, I ask, what's the status of this capacity building grant? And they said it's a cost reimbursement grant. And I said to myself, how is that capacity building if I already have the money?
Yeah.
And so therefore, I'm not going to be able to proceed with applying for this capacity building grant, which is significant money, $250,000 over a couple of years. But it still is only for organizations that have the working capital to be able to float that much money. Yeah. And most of my are reimbursement grants right now. And so it's just thinking about that as well. Like the thought you were saying, hey, what is the long-term impact? Who does this benefit? And it's supposed to be for smaller grassroots orgs like ours, yet it's a cost reimbursement grant for capacity building. I think those two.
It's ironic.
Yeah. Alanis.
I'm interested if you can go a little bit deeper on what does TSNE actually do in this realm, and also like the scalability of it, because to that point, and to the example of our partnership and frankly our subcontracting relationship, which was the vehicle to help mitigate a completely different grant that was cost reimbursement of we are a larger organization. We have operating cash flow. We're able to. We have cash in the bank, right? So we can float. And even though there's incredible capacity in organizations like TSNE, which is geographically somewhat not as stretched, maybe, but come on out to Worcester.
Come on. Of course, I'm here.
But also part of this ripple effect conversation is, as we're talking about what WCAC and LL did, could we create opportunities for other larger nonprofits that do have similar cash flow to do the same thing?
Right.
So it loosens that relationship up a little bit without having necessarily for LL to go to like a TSNE and be like, hey, and exhaust that time and expense itself of just creating the more localized opportunities around something like that.
Yeah.
But I know you guys do a lot more than that.
Sure, I can give you the short, or we can be here all night because I love talking about this.
Perfect.
But it's from the outside, one person might say these are all different programs. They're all what's the unifying tie? So I'll bring that in the end. So I think depending on who works with us and at what time, you may see us in different ways. So a lot of folks know us as a fiscal sponsor, which we are.
Right.
As I mentioned, the country's first, and it's the largest. When you look at our finances, is the largest part that we do. For those nerds out there, which I am one, there's different models of fiscal sponsorship, you may know. And a lot of people are familiar with the pass-through Model C kind of process where you're not incorporated, you're not a nonprofit, but you want to accept funds. and a fiscal sponsor can help you do that and then report on that. We don't do too much of that, just a very little bit. And a lot of those are in relationship with philanthropy. So there might be a coalition. It's usually funding coalitions.
Yeah, we have a similar relationship.
Yeah, when there's multiple there. So we'll do that a little bit. But the majority of what we do is Model A. And in that system, an organization will apply for fiscal sponsorship. We call them FSOs for short. And if they come through, they're actually our employees. And so in that way, and they could be across the country. I think we're in 35 states. And they can have access to our health insurance, our retirement plans. Then we negotiate those for 600 or 800 people instead of the 80 that we have here at the office. We can share the IT systems around that. We just rolled out single sign-on, which for those of us in the world, this is like so exciting about. But and also have access to an HR business partner, a lawyer, and a grants and finance manager, and payroll. And so to have that whole back end taken care of, and to allow organizations or create the structure where they can just focus on programming and be effective in that area. They don't even have to have a fiduciary board, of course, because they're not a 501c3, it's our board. But they have an advisory board. And so we actually help these organizations through along with the intellectual capital that comes along with being together and sharing a lot of those strategies. So that's actually a big part of what we do. That means we need to know employment law in 35 states. It's very complicated. If anybody was going to start up an organization, I would say don't think about being if you're going to be a professional fiscal sponsor, think about it. Because there's actually no rules around this. Any nonprofit organization can sponsor somebody. And so those experiences can be vastly different depending on where you go through. So that's actually the largest part of what we do. We also have consulting, training, cohort learning, and executive search and transition. And I think that's where the largest number of folks know us through. We run 5 cohorts right now. They're really centered on the craft of consultancy. So we just launched an Emerging Consultants of Color training program to create pathways of consultants of color to get into the field, and also a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for consultants program. So existing consultants can apply those lenses to their own practices. And those are national cohorts that people can get into. We also have a executive leadership transition, what's next cohort. Executive directors or leaders thinking about their exit from an organization and what's next for them. A lot of people don't think about. And then we do searches. We also do traditional OD, organizational development consulting, that board, that strategic planning, all that good stuff. And the third area that a lot of folks know us for is the property management services. So we are the owner and operator of the Nonprofit Center, which is on 89 South Street by South Station. We also manage the Link in Cambridge, and at least 15 other different properties around Boston where we are the property managers. So actually there's no other that we know nonprofit property managers out there. There's for-profit property managers. And so we do come with a different value alignment when we think about how are you doing leases? How are you working around ticket systems for improvement of spaces? We carry that lens with us. So it's a pretty unique perspective. And at the Nonprofit Center, as a tax-exempt organization, we pass on that property tax savings to the tenants. So we're about 25% below market.
Are your tenants exclusively nonprofit tenants?
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's a mix in there. There's some funders in there, there's some grassroots organizations, and we're 100% full. And it's one of those, people think with a pandemic, you're not going to have office spaces, but nonprofits are always going to need space to assemble and get together and have board meetings.
We added
and
space.
Community.
Yeah. And a strange twist. And we're out of space, actually.
This is bigger than where you were?
This is 2,000 square feet bigger than where we were.
Oh, okay.
And we're bumping at the walls. Yeah.
And so, those spaces might look different, like, in shared spaces or things like that.
Way better, but yeah.
Yeah. And then I would say the last part that we've been doing for a while is learning and evaluations. We put a lot of reports and research out. We just issued a report called Valuing Our Nonprofit Workforce. We've done now 4 of them. And it looks at understanding pay equity levels in the nonprofit sector. A lot in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, a little Connecticut. And in this year, and it's all free, you can go on our website if you're looking to hire a development director or executive director, what's the rate right now at the different percentiles. But we also go a little further and find out what's your reimbursements for folks working from home. Do you pay their internet? Do you pay their cell phone? You might offer retirement, but what's your match? How much are you paying into it? And so the data that we see over time is that or nonprofit organizations are contributing more to retirement accounts now. They're offering it in the first place. They're giving some of those reimbursements. The pay equity gap on gender is closing. Men still make more than women in across the board in executive roles, but that is shrinking a little bit. We're also looking at where folks are getting interested into leadership, and that's actually on a decline. So there's a lot of research that's out there.
There's a decline in people being interested in leadership?
Yeah, and so the Building Movement Project has put a lot of information out, the National Council of Nonprofits, because of a lack of pay equity. There's burnout. We just talked about working and doing all that stuff, and many hours and into the night, and also the mental health and exhaustion that comes along with this work. We're deeply rooted in the work because that's our mission. That means as workers, we're taking that on too. It's very hard to compartmentalize for many people this work. It's so personal, and the work requires us to live in proximity to the organizations or the communities that we're serving, which means the cost of living is out of control in many cases, definitely in Boston, but all over the place.
We're catching up.
We're definitely catching up.
I saw that.
Yes, yeah.
And so, but you have to live in those areas to be able to serve those communities. So that adds to it. And so the general interest to get into nonprofit leadership is waning because of that. And so in our survey results, 86% of our organizations who were surveyed are actually worrying about competition for workforce.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We've been talking about that's actually the biggest challenge to nonprofits coming up in the next several years is workforce. So getting the sector ready and changing it in order to be ready for those workers coming in.
In an instance where you have a report like that if I'm reading it, I'm also comparing myself to other nonprofits for the competitiveness factor, right? So there's a point of pressure on leadership at nonprofits to be like, we need to think about how we're investing in our talent and, pay scale and pay transparency and benefits. But the challenge of that is how we get our funding and what we can and can't use our funding for, right? Or what funding we don't get to, help an operations person or a marketing or development person.
Well, it's fascinating because I'm in another conversation right now with a State Department. We spent $10,000 on an executive coach. We had a program director, first time running a program of this size, was $450,000. And so now the conversation is, well, I don't know if your line item really includes that.
Yeah.
Well, no, the line item says training, and it also says for the improvement of the skills for someone that may be in a leadership role.
And face value, that kind of report almost has us looking at like, how are we competing for talent? But then I'm making an assumption, but obviously you answer at whatever level of detail. The TSNE, in some ways, it's almost there's a holding a responsibility to say to the funding community of like you're helping perpetuate those problems.
Well, that's what he was saying. Is are we causing harm or is it?
Absolutely. And I think so. There's a whole learning and educational side of that, and philanthropy is a part of that. And I think about having been a government funder for a while. Although we didn't have this, many have 10% indirect rate.
Yes.
Yeah. That kills me because it's not 10%, it's 25, 30%.
Sometimes it's shared.
And
too.
shared.
Yeah.
And this is essential to the work. Programs don't run themselves. And so I do know many organizations who will take these grants because it's very hard to say no to a grant at all. And then you find out you're actually subsidizing the government.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're having to do it. And so what's the relationship here?
Right.
Like we're having to cover the gap here. Right. And so I do know organizations that have just set out recently, unless it's this level, it's unrestricted, or it's at least 20, 25% indirect, we just can't accept these grants. Right. We can't do it anymore. And that starts the advocacy of what this is. And so these reports start to generate that. And I think in a trust-based philanthropy, which I'm sure you all know that term, those conversations are easier to have. And other cases that have more behind the ivory wall, more restricted government, bureaucratic, you just might not be able to do that anymore.
I will give the feds credit. They're upping the de minimis rate to 15%.
That's great.
So
nice.
We just have to make sure some of our other funders are also applying that
in
accordingly.
alignment with.
Yes.
And at all end, give unrestricted operating. Just give the money.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think that's where, and it's interesting, you're coming from Mass Cultural Council because we haven't touched on that as a sector.
Not so much. Yeah, we haven't so much.
And I've had conversations with local, arts and culture groups here that have struggled with mission drift and
Yeah.
chasing money. And then having the community conversation, feeling a little derailed of that they're either off mission, they've raised all this money and they're not doing the thing that they said they were going to do, and it's more because they just have to keep chasing the dollars.
That's
and
right.
people please. And if we could just cut the shit on that, basically, I mean, just to be blunt, I mean the general operating support is what gives us the greatest flexibility to just respect and trust what we do.
And try things out.
And
I mean,
just try
that's the
things,
thing.
and fail. Also fail.
The
That's fine.
razor
Yeah.
edge for this is 0.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we are expected as a sector to make every program work perfectly right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And if something goes wrong, even just an inch, you're off for the next time.
Yeah, find somebody else.
But if you're in other sectors, that's actually expected. So if
Exactly.
you're in a startup or
Yeah.
creative, it's actually encouraged. And so we learn from that, we grow. But in this sector, because of that margin and the expectation of that, that R&D, that chance to dream and try, back to your point earlier, to really investigate, is there something here? No, we tried that out, but we learned this from it, so let's go for it. To be able to risk and fail and be okay with that, and have a funder who also is with you on that, it's pretty rare.
But that's fun. It is frustrating. We've had this conversation before, but you tell me any other way that someone learns.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no other way to learn than try it, learn from it. Oh, this is what we're going to
as long
adjust
as you
and do
learn from it.
different,
Yeah.
right? If you keep, but in some ways, the way that we're structured, it doesn't value that learning. It values the status quo. It says just keep producing this at this level. Don't disrupt, because if I try something different and it doesn't succeed at the level that I said, that we just talked about, then I may retract dollars.
Right.
However, if there's an entity that's already producing something that doesn't create the impact, we'll keep funding that because it's doing what I want it to do. And so that's where we've had this conversation before. Is sometimes it's like, when I got into this, where I just wanted to help young people.
Yeah.
And I heard about it, right? And I had friends. The system is not broken. It's designed to do what it's doing.
That's right.
And you're like, no, yeah. The more I'm in this as a leader in the nonprofit sector and now on the board of Greater Worcester and all these different things, you start to kind of get a sniff that, no, that's the way that they want this thing to work. One of our guests who hasn't aired yet, Hildy Gottlieb.
You were kind of referencing a little bit of
some of her stuff. And she talks about catalytic thinking, and she really gets into the idea of, I loved her. There's no such thing as organizations. We just made them up. Like they really don't exist, right? They're people. They're groups of people. And so how does that work? But one of the core tenets is that she says, is mathematically, you can't create a positive by removing a negative. And so to your point, most of our nonprofits, most of our addressing of issues, even in the cultural, is, hey, this is where we are. We just want to get it here by removing this negative. And by doing that, you're only going to get to stasis. You never make the advances that you are looking for. And so it's interesting to say, how do we collectively get okay with the stasis that we individually, I say this with my participants, and most of us think of this way, but even me, it's a phrase from my friend Dan Tacchini. He says, most of us find a level of despair we can tolerate and call it happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I feel we do.
Yeah.
That's depressing.
But I feel, look, when we leave up out of here and we walk down our street and we see the number of unhoused people, and I make a conscious decision not to make eye contact because it's going to affect me emotionally, morally, right? And psychologically, it's because I'm accepting, I mean, there's myriad issues there, but it's like, that's okay. That's good enough. Yeah. This is good enough. And to me, that is really what becomes so frustrating when you're at that level of working with people and then trying to communicate that. My question is this. In this day and age, misinformation is ubiquitous. And so how, even when we pull reports like this and we give you data, we give you numbers, we show you economically, it's broken down in so many ways that if you do this, this will be better off, even for you, for all of us. How do you then still, right? Because I want the data. We gave you the data. Well, this is still what I'm going to do. And so the question is, in your role, how do you pull those two together? How do you communicate that in a way that you get the different sectors to understand that challenge and begin to change the way they think about this? I imagine that's difficult.
It is, and I think it doesn't rely on one person or just a couple people. It's really coalition building, is what you're describing. And the data can only speak to the data. The data has limitations, just like a lot of it. But to say, where can you have a piece of that? Where can you have a piece of that? Where can we all fit into it? Because it is all together, going back to our definition or my thoughts about the social sector. And I think we all have a moral compass that will lead us towards that. And we have to get those people in the room. And what we can do, what our superpower is this, this over here, whether it's fiscal sponsorship or whatever. Mm-hmm. But your superpower is relationships, or your superpower is the advocacy or even lobbying in many cases. And so how can we all work together in order to bring that forward? Because you're right, the misinformation is out there. There's also a willingness, there's a deep desire to maintain that because it benefits certain people. And I think of donor advised funds. Mm-hmm. I think of certain systems that were created in order to help sustain philanthropy instead of actually serving the organizations that are there, because there's no payout requirement with the DAF.
Right.
And so you could just live on that for a long time. I know other funders are thinking about giving loans and calling them grants as well to kind of take credit, but not to jeopardize their bottom line. And so I think we have to be really aggressive around looking at where those triggers are, where those specific inequities have been planted, and then remove them. And that requires a lot of people building on their superpowers to do that.
From your vantage point, are you seeing any of those real shifts happening? Like, you got two Joe Schmoes from Worcester talking about this. Most of our guests have, including yourself, are they're on this page, this sort of ethos about this. But from the macro policy influencer, funder, philanthropic, are there any tidbits that this can shift?
Yeah, I think because the conversation is where it is. I think that people are coming together around it. And so there's a group of funders that we work with, some funders we choose not to work with because of that too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
saying
so,
no.
And that's hard. That's really hard in a nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
But if there's not alignment there and it moves beyond the transaction, that's what we're looking for. So in that coalition building, we are seeing that. And so that actually was one of those panels. That's the reason why I think you found me to say, we need the researcher. We need the policy wonk. We need the funder. We need the intermediary. We need these other people to come together. And once you put it out there, it's there. I think Philanthropy Mass does a great job with bringing all that together.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And many state associations also do that kind of work. But it's pulling it out of that. It's pulling it out of community, out of state, and to create a national movement towards certain things. And that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. I was going to ask also, you mentioned earlier about the longitudinal need to invest and look at these things. And I love the idea of all the spokes that were in the report that need to come together for sustainability. I had a question with longitudinal impact and work in relationship to a democratic system which turns over here in Worcester every 2 years, one nationally that turns every 4 years.
Yeah.
And so to what degree, if I'm looking for longitudinal, can I get beyond this cycle of election if I'm working with certain public sectors?
Yeah, that's the question. That's really hard. And it's not just in elected officials, it's in other places as well. And so there could be change at a foundation or a community foundation. There could be change of leadership at a nonprofit organization. There's a lot of that. So how do you maintain programmatic impact through those changes? I have to say, I would never have 100% of my funding in one bucket or 100% of my areas. If anything, in the last presidential elections, where the NEA, the NEH was on the chopping block, literally.
Right.
And so if you were an organization that received significant funding from that was really worried. The political whim is prevalent. And so thinking about your work in community, and those folks are always going to be there. Those individuals are always going to be doing the work. We press on. It's those relationships that are more constant than changes in either the government or in funding systems. And I think that is the thing that sees us through that change.
What would you say to that? Could maybe some criticism of the role of the intermediary in that? Because I used to struggle with this too.
Yeah.
Like, we would get money at Skillworks, and then we take a % off the top, and then we get the money to the the grassroots organizations doing the work. And we did a lot of capacity building. We really
with
did
cost reimbursement stuff.
With cost reimbursement.
You were doing capacity building with cost reimbursement?
We did not do cost reimbursement.
Cool.
But we
Then
did
you're still cool.
some. We did a lot of upfront.
You got to pound me. Don't leave me
a
out
lot
here.
of upfront payments, and then there would be a cost reimbursement element to it later on. But there would be a lot of initial sign the contract, get a big check. Same with us. Sometimes, and I've said this before, I'd walk in my office and there'd just be a check on my desk, which is interesting. But I think there's so the absorption of some of those funds. And so they're diverted from the grassroots. Like, what is that in your work, and how does that get kind of justified or sort of ironed out?
Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things when we think about programmatic work and we think about our theory of change and our decision-making frameworks and all the tools that are out there, we always have to say what harm is being created from this. Because whether you're a consultant, you can create harm. Whether you're a fiscal sponsor, you can do that. Yeah. It can happen. And so we're trying to think about what is out there and ways to mitigate that. So in fiscal sponsorship, like I mentioned, anybody can be a fiscal sponsor. There's actually no rules around it. For better or for worse.
That's interesting.
It was created by pretty much TSNE, but then went on from there. And so we were just talking about, the guidelines and the structures and all this stuff. It's all created. Back to your point of like organizations, like people made it up. Yeah. Like that's really the reality here. And beyond that, we've created a whole system. So when we think about funds coming in and holding them, so we a lot of fiscal sponsors will charge their fees on income, and so anything that comes in, they get paid off the top. Yeah. We don't do that. Yeah. We're one of the only ones in the country that does on expenses. So those funds we may actually not see fees on that until they're paid out, which could be months later from that. And so that's how equity shows up a little bit in our work there. But I would say even on holding the money, I think there's a conversation there of when you've got a grassroots organization that's community-centered and that grant has come in, but they're not yet ready to spend on that grant because of timing or whatever it might be, the interest that we collect on that actually goes to subsidizing the entire fiscal sponsorship initiative, which runs at a deficit. And so it's the interest on that helps subsidize that work. I think there's a real case, and we've been having internal conversations about, are there ways in our structure that we can put this in a CD, an interest-bearing CD for that particular organization?
To make them for this specific organization.
Yeah,
that's
and
good.
It's completely complicated, but that's us to figure it out, right? That we're supposed to be doing that, working on behalf of these organizations. Yeah. So how can we share that or provide that? It was their grant that came in. Right. And I think there's that power dynamic that we have to constantly check in with ourselves to say, we're a fiscal sponsor, but that doesn't mean we know this program. These are the folks who are the expert on the work. Yeah. And I think the challenge there is when a fiscal sponsor doesn't realize that not only they're not just a customer, they're a thought partner and they're doing work that can be bounds more effective than the fiscal sponsor themselves. And in our case, they're also employees. Right. So it's the mix of the three that could be difficult to address when we're talking about the harm that's presented. And so we introduce a lot of bureaucratic part of that as well because of the reporting and some of the things for our 501c3. So I think the part of that is understanding what is real, what is manufactured in that bureaucracy, what can we strip away, what ambiguity are we comfortable with? And so if we're going to be supporting more of these organizations working that, we got to get comfortable with that. Wow. And so that may also mean in situations where we need to create maybe a separate organization that houses some assets, or like our nonprofit center, because it's all in one. Right. In order to take those risks, to really work alongside with our organizations.
I love that idea. We've even thought about that, just looking at our accounts of like, what's this money isn't really working for us or our partners. Right. Could we look at that differently? We've just started conversations about that, but we have a decent amount of cash that doesn't really do anything for us.
I was talking with Brian Fabes earlier this week. He is a senior fellow at the Corporate Coalition in Chicago. He was on a panel at MIT discussing second chance hiring. But what I was impressed with and why I reached out to him and was happy about his conversation is predominantly in workforce development. But I think that is parallels to what we're talking about. And so one of the things that was like, duh, but I'd never thought about up until now was always like, ask employers what they need, train the potential employee in that, and then they'll hire them. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so,
I could have told you that.
but what they've been doing is partnering with a coalition of workforce development and grassroots orgs and all that to then, but they had a desire of employers to then be trained, the employers to be adapted. To your point about we have to be comfortable with that, right? So if you're going to hire someone who has a criminal record, there are certain conditions within your company as an employer that you should take into consideration, that you need to adjust, maybe from legal, maybe from HR, maybe from the day-to-day. They may have to go see a court case or direction, all those kind of things.
That's right.
And so to me, it was like, wow, I'd never thought to go train them on how to be. Yeah. It was always on the, and so I think here, this conversation of how do we train is there an interest, I guess, from philanthropy, from VCs, to want to learn this? Okay, I want to do equity. I want to do this work. Instead of saying, hey, I'm going to do my research and say, do it this way. Well, let's bring in people to help train you to be receptive of those organizations and those challenges that they're going to have, if that's what you want to do. Not just this whim from someone up top that says,
readiness,
hey, right? Like, I want to do this now, and not taking into the necessary steps and the questions, a very consistent and focused process of asking those questions. Or if we do this, who's affected?
Right.
What conditions are needed in order to make this these kind of things versus, hey, we want to do this. In your work, are you seeing any of that from the funding side of saying, hey, we have an interest to learn how to better work with smaller organizations and nonprofits?
It's actually a great question. I want to make sure that I talked about it too. So you set me up perfectly for this. So yes, and we talked to a lot of organizations about their capacity needs and how to strengthen them, and a lot of funders who also see it on the other side. So we just finished a planning process to roll out shared services across the sector. So in this case for us, built on what we know from being a fiscal sponsor and working on behalf of organizations on the back end, this is taking it a step further. And so this is working with 501c3s, and we're open. We're discovering at this stage to not only share services on the back end, which are those accounting, the finance, the payroll, all that kind of stuff, but also the front end. So digital communications, that's program evaluation. To your point, most organizations don't have program evaluation. It's one of the many hats that we all wear. But that longitudinal work requires some kind of evaluation as you go along. And you also want to create that next grant proposal that's going to ask you that question of how do you know? And so program evaluation is one of those oft roles that the ED ends up also having to do. Also, there's the HR, there's the IT director, there's all these roles that either are not covered or other duties as assigned, as we all know in the job description. So we're looking at rolling out a system and having equity-centered, values-oriented staff folks work on behalf of these collectives. And so you may need 10 hours of HR director or 15 hours of digital comms or whatever it might be, and you can get that through TSNE. And we work very closely with the Bar Foundation. So the Bar Foundation actually gave us a grant to do a year-long planning. We found that there's really not a lot of activity in this area. I know you're doing a little bit here.
Yeah, no, it's minute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and so what does that look like? So we created a business model around it. We have a real framework of how we might roll this out. And then now we're in the pilot stage. So we just received $1 million grant from the Bar Foundation last winter to get this started up. And so we're starting on the back end, we're getting to the front end, but realizing that organization, this is not sustainability. This is not something that you could just do forever. And so not only that, but how do you have access to high quality, value-centered, affordable shared services that's working on behalf of multiple people? And I think even within the arts and cultural space, there's specifics within that. I've talked to a lot of folks who'd be like, it would be great to have someone do group sales for our theater company and go through that, or do certain specific technical work too. But it's just bringing people together to be able to have access to it.
It's just, that is really compelling, and I think I'm so glad you guys are doing this
Doing
and
what you do.
doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because I think that the other opportunity is that having those people on the ground working with different organizations, there's also just the shared learning between the
Tremendous.
organizations.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're not like always tripping on ourselves too.
And
Yeah.
that gets to the advocacy part of that. Like, what are we learning from
Yeah.
working with these organizations?
Right.
So we have a perspective based on the fiscally sponsored organizations.
Yeah.
But once we're in community with all of these other organizations, what is coming out of that?
Right.
And what do we do with that?
Yeah.
You know what else I
love
found too in the need to build that advocacy and the coalition is that there are fizzers of I can't advocate with you because you may take away some of my dollars.
Competition.
The competition is
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying. Like even the overall structure
That's the
of the
structure.
system kind of pits against the building of coalitions.
100%.
To be able to make the transformative moves that we talk about that we want to see in our society.
Yeah.
It's kind of set up that way to be like too much.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you apply, you've got to choose it, but we can't fund you if this is happening over
Here
here.
you're
And
doing it,
what are they?
yeah.
You tell us what they are
Yeah.
doing, and then we'll make so then you have to report on somebody else's work too.
Right. Yeah.
And I think where we're not a funder, obviously, but where we tend to approach this in conversations with funder is in our cohort learning.
Mhm.
So we're bringing 15 or 20 organizations together.
Right.
We have a partnership right now, Powering Cultural Futures, with the Bar Foundation and the Community Foundation of Western Mass. And they're providing some funding, and then we're facilitating and organizing a lot of the work where we're moving it together. So those 15 organizations are moving forward. They're not competing with one another, and also acquiring the skills necessary to strengthen their organizations. And so I think once you've got those key partners, so there was 3 of them right there, that see the need to move collectively forward
Mhm.
instead of saying, well, you apply, but we're not going to tell you what they got, and they're not going to tell you about their process. We're going to keep it all siloed and
Oh my
secretive.
goodness, yeah.
I think, as a funder, some of these
Yeah.
practices that are there, I'm seeing that change quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, we started doing that with before I left, we started Catapult. Mario's telling us we have to wrap up, which means there's a 2.0 version of this. But we started this concept of Catapult, which was the exact idea is like rather than fight over the piece of pie, is like go to your strength and coalition across the continuum
Absolutely.
for workforce development, which by the way, there's a set of papers authored by Jerry Rubin, the former CEO of Jewish Vocational Services, there's 4 papers. One of them is on businesses working with reentry.
Yeah.
And the business is doing the work
Right.
of learning how
You got
to
that? Send it
hire.
over. I
So,
wanna
yeah,
see
I think
that.
I have a copy in here.
Michael, we got to get him out of
We
here
got-
on this.
I know,
No, we
this is-
got to get him out of here on this. No.
I could spend all
question.
day with
You
you
got
two.
the last
I do,
question.
I
You
do.
got the last
Just because
question.
he played the
Yes.
clarinet. I mean,
Yes.
I'm stereotypical here, but band can't band. Do
Yeah.
you have a band story? Come on. Do you have a band story for us? A humorous nothing?
For the radio,
Like you
for
drank
podcasts?
out of your clarinet or something? Like you was drinking beer from the clarinet?
Is that possible? There's
I don't
a lot
know.
of-
I was
Obviously,
saying,
you know that I would have tried it.
Yes.
there's a lot of road games.
Okay.
And there's a lot of young people not supervised all the time. So I'd say there's a lot of stories I can't share, but my freshman year in college, we did the Outback Bowl in Tampa, Florida.
Oh,
Okay.
I think we
yeah.
played Penn State at the time. And we stayed at the beach, and you get a lot of, it's late, who knows what's going on. All of a sudden, there's about 200 of us in the ocean playing the fight song.
Oh, that's awesome.
To nobody around.
And not this is pre
Oh,
iPhone
thank
you. There's no
camera?
video, no nothing.
1998.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was gonna say
No.
we're about the same age, so this is
No.
pre cell phone cameras.
But
yes.
I think the fish had a great
Oh
time.
my
I
gosh!
think they
Yeah.
were
That's,
really
why
Serenaded
that's why all the sharks are down there right now.
They
They're
were
just
so
waiting for
excited.
your siren.
Yes, yeah. And then you wake up and say, did we just play the fight song in the beach
Yes.
at midnight to nobody? Yeah, that probably happened.
But
yeah.
now you've shared it with us, which
Now we
is
know.
amazing. I love that.
And
You
the
might inspire other people to do the same.
And it had water to do, ripple effect, it all.
Oh my
mixed
God, it was
together.
perfect.
See?
Yes.
That was great.
This was great. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on. And I do think there's the 2.0. We have a lot of 2.0s to set up.
We do.
And I actually think we need to bring everyone together and have a giant ripple effect because there's so much
Good
synergy
stuff.
of these
Yeah,
conversations,
yeah.
which gives us hope that there's
Amazing
some
folks.
shifts
You're one of
forward.
the
Yes.
folks who've been taught. It's been amazing just
just
to
really
hear
great.
what folks are doing and
and hard work.
learn about it.
of
Yeah.
really,
And it's
yeah.
my pleasure. Anytime to come out. And like I said, I love
Yeah, come
Worcester,
to the
so I'm
Woo.
happy to be here.
Perfect. 15 minutes away. Thank you so much. Enjoyed it immensely. And for everyone, like, subscribe, follow, tell your grandmother, get it out there. get our followers, and join the conversation. We have a
Why don't
phone
you tell
number.
your grandmother too? Tell the little kids. Tell
Tell the
all the
little
generations. Grandma is cool, but we want to tell.
But we have a call-in number now.
Oh yeah, the call-in number.
We have a call-in number. So if you want to give, I don't remember the number, Marrio, but it's going to be in the description.
Yeah.
We want to hear your thoughts. So call in, leave a message.
Yeah.
Tony
might
with
call. I
Tony.
had Tony's
been the only caller so far. I gotta get Bev to call in.
Yeah.
But yes, please, thank you for our loyal listeners, Jonathan Cohen especially. All right, and have a good day,
Get in touch with your
everybody.
man Mike, John.
Yes.
Come on,
Yeah.
John.
I can't wait for
All
dinner.
I want to talk
Jonathan.
with you, brother.
Yes.
Nice.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Mario. Too.
Thank
you.
Yes.
You're listening to The Ripple Effect, a nonprofit imperative with Waddell and Marybeth Campbell. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you on the next one.